The cold wind cut through his thin jacket like a knife. He pulled his collar up, but it did nothing. The winter of 2019 had arrived early in Philadelphia, and it showed no mercy to those who had nowhere to go. He sat on a flattened cardboard box outside a busy Italian restaurant, watching people come and go. They walked past him like he was part of the sidewalk, like he was invisible. A woman in a red coat stepped around him without even glancing down. A man on his phone nearly tripped over his legs and muttered something rude before hurrying inside. He was 53 years old, and somewhere along the way, the world had forgotten he existed. It had not always been this way. Just 4 years ago, he had been a music teacher at a high school across town. He had a small apartment with a view of a parking lot, but it was his. He had a 12-year-old car that started on the third try every morning, but it got him where he needed to go. He had students who called him their favorite teacher, who stayed after class just to hear him play piano, who wrote him thank you notes at the end of each semester. He had a wife. That was the part that hurt most to remember. Her name still echoed in his mind every single day. They had met at a community concert 26 years ago. She was sitting 3 rows ahead of him, and when the tenor hit the high note in the final aria, she turned around with tears streaming down her face. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted in the universe. They were married within a year. She was a librarian with a gentle voice and a laugh that sounded like music. She loved opera, old books, and Sunday morning pancakes. She believed in him more than he ever believed in himself. When he doubted his singing, she would shake her head and say the same thing every time. Your voice is a gift. Never waste it. For 25 years, they built a quiet and beautiful life together. They never had children, but they had each other, and that was enough. He would come home from teaching and find her reading on the couch, her glasses slipping down her nose. He would sing to her while making dinner, silly songs he made up on the spot, and she would laugh until her sides hurt. Then everything changed. It started with a cough that would not go away. She brushed it off at first. Just allergies, she said. Just a cold. But the cough got worse. Then came the weight loss. Then the fatigue that left her unable to climb the stairs. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. He remembered every detail of that day. The fluorescent lights in the doctor's office. The way the clock on the wall ticked too loud. The doctor's voice, calm and clinical, delivering words that felt like a death sentence. Stage 4. It had already spread. What followed was a blur of hospital rooms, chemotherapy sessions, and sleepless nights. He used every penny of their savings on treatments. When that ran out, he took out loans. When the loans were denied, he sold the car, then the furniture, then anything else he could find. None of it mattered. 14 months after the diagnosis, she was gone. He held her hand in those final moments. She was so thin by then, barely a shadow of the woman he had married. But her eyes were still the same, still full of love, still looking at him like he was the only person in the world. Promise me something, she whispered. Her voice was so weak, he had to lean close to hear. Anything, he said. Promise me you will keep singing, no matter what happens. Promise me you will not let your voice die with me. He promised. He held her hand and promised with tears running down his face. And then she closed her eyes and slipped away, and the world went silent. After that, he fell apart. The grief was like drowning in slow motion. He stopped going to work. He stopped answering the phone. He stopped paying bills. The school called and called until they finally let him go. The landlord knocked on his door for 3 months before finally changing the locks. He found himself on the streets with nothing but the clothes on his back and a photograph of his wife that he kept in his pocket. The photo was worn and creased from being held so many times. In it, she was laughing, her hair blowing in the wind at the beach. It was the only thing he had left of her. The first few weeks were the hardest. He learned quickly that the world was not kind to people like him. Store owners chased him away. Police told him to move along, People looked through him like he was made of glass. He went entire days without anyone speaking to him, without anyone acknowledging that he was alive. He stopped singing. What was the point? His wife was gone. His life was gone. His voice felt like a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. So he let it go silent, just like the rest of him. Now, 3 years later, he sat outside this restaurant every evening. Not because he expected anything, but because the smell of the food reminded him of being human, of Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations and all the ordinary moments he had taken for granted. The restaurant was called Rosario's Trattoria. It was a family-owned place, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles on every table. He had been watching it for weeks, observing the rhythm of the place. The owner was an older Italian man with silver hair and a booming laugh. He seemed kinder than most. Once, he had seen the owner give leftover bread to a stray dog in the alley. That small act of kindness had stuck with him. Tonight, the restaurant was especially busy. Through the large front windows, he could see families gathered around tables, sharing plates of pasta and bottles of wine. A little girl pressed her face against the glass and looked out at him. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Then, her mother pulled her away, and the moment was gone. His stomach twisted with hunger. He had not eaten in 2 days. The last thing he had was half a sandwich someone had thrown away behind a coffee shop. He had learned to push past the shame of digging through trash. Survival did not leave room for pride. A couple emerged from the restaurant, laughing and holding hands. The woman carried a small bag of leftovers. The man glanced at him briefly, then looked away just as fast, guiding his date toward their car. The leftovers went with them. He pulled his thin jacket tighter and tried to stop shivering. The temperature was dropping. Tomorrow would be even colder, according to the forecast he had overheard from a passerby talking on the phone. He closed his eyes and thought about his wife. He thought about her smile, her laugh, the way she used to rest her head on his shoulder during movies. He thought about the promise he had made in that hospital room, the promise he had broken. "Keep singing," she had said, "no matter what." But how could he sing when his heart had been ripped out? How could he find music when everything inside him felt dead? He opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. The stars were hidden behind clouds, but he knew they were there. Somewhere, up there. He hoped she was watching. He hoped she understood why he had given up. But deep down, he knew she would not understand. She had never given up on anything in her life. She had fought until the very end, clinging to hope even when there was none left. The thought stirred something inside him. A tiny spark, almost too small to notice. Maybe, he thought. Maybe tomorrow he would try something different. Maybe tomorrow he would finally ask for help. Not just a handout, but a chance to be seen. A chance to be heard. He reached into his pocket and touched the worn photograph of his wife. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself. "Tomorrow, I will try." And with that small promise, he curled up against the cold brick wall and waited for the long night to pass. The next morning came slow and painful. He woke up shivering, his body stiff from sleeping on concrete. His back ached. His fingers were numb. But something felt different inside him. That tiny spark from the night before had not gone out. It was still there, flickering like a candle in the wind. He spent the day walking the streets, trying to stay warm. He stopped at a public library for a few hours, sitting in the corner, where the heating vent blew warm air. A security guard watched him the whole time but did not ask him to leave. Small mercies. As the afternoon faded into evening, he found himself walking back toward the restaurant. His feet carried him there without thinking, like they knew where he needed to be. He stood across the street and watched the place come alive. The lights inside glowed warm and golden. Staff moved between tables, carrying plates piled high with food. The owner was there, greeting customers at the door with a handshake and a smile. He had the look of a man who had worked hard his whole life and was proud of what he had built. For a long time, he just stood there watching. His heart was pounding. The idea that had come to him last night now seemed foolish. Crazy, even. Who was he to walk into a place like that and ask for anything? He was nobody. He had nothing to offer. But then he thought of his wife again. He thought of her voice in that hospital room. Weak, but certain. Keep singing. No matter what. He had broken that promise for 3 years. Maybe it was time to try keeping it. Before he could talk himself out of it, he crossed the street. His legs felt shaky, but he kept moving. He walked past the front entrance, too afraid to go in that way, and made his way around to the side of the building. There was a door there that led to the kitchen. He had seen staff come out for smoke breaks. He waited near a dumpster, trying to gather his courage. A few minutes later, the door swung open and a young woman stepped out. She was wearing a black apron and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired but kind. When she saw him, she stopped. Her body tensed up the way people always did when they noticed him. "Sir, you cannot be here," she said. Her voice was not mean, but it was firm. "I know," he said. His voice came out rough and scratchy. He had not spoken to anyone in days. "I am sorry. I just want to talk to the owner. Please. Just 1 minute. That is all I am asking." The young woman hesitated. She looked him up and down, taking in his dirty clothes and unshaven face. For a moment, he was sure she would tell him to leave. "Wait here," she said finally. And then she disappeared back inside. He stood there in the cold, his heart racing. Every second felt like an hour. He was about to give up and walk away when the door opened again. This time, it was the owner. He was a large man, broad in the shoulders with thick arms and hands that looked like they had kneaded 1,000 pounds of dough. His silver hair was slicked back, and his face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from years of both smiling and worrying. He wore a white chef's coat with a few stains on it, proof that he still worked in his own kitchen. The owner looked at him with eyes that were cautious, but not cruel. There was something in those eyes, some flicker of recognition. Not of him specifically, but of his situation. Like the owner had seen hard times himself and had not forgotten what they looked like. "My server says you want to talk to me," the owner said. His voice was deep, with a slight Italian accent. "So talk." He swallowed hard. The words he had rehearsed in his head suddenly vanished. For a moment, he stood there, with his mouth open, unable to speak. Then he found his voice. "I know how this looks," he said. "I know you probably get people asking for handouts all the time, but I am not asking for charity. I want to earn something." The owner raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I used to be a music teacher," he continued. "Before everything fell apart, I used to sing. I was good at it. My wife always said I had a gift." His voice cracked on the word wife. He paused, took a breath, and kept going. "I have not eaten in 2 days. And I was wondering if maybe I could sing for a meal. Just one song. Outside, not inside. I would not bother your customers. I just want a chance to do something, to be something, even if it is just for 5 minutes." There was a long silence. The owner studied him, his expression impossible to read. From inside the kitchen, someone laughed. A moment later, a young man in a dirty apron appeared in the doorway. He was lean with a smirk on his face. "A singing homeless guy?" the young man said. "That is a new one. What is he going to do? Serenade the garbage cans?" Another worker appeared behind him, grinning. "Maybe he can sing to the rats. They could use some entertainment." The two of them laughed. The sound was sharp and mocking, and it cut deep. He felt his face grow hot with shame. This was a mistake. He should not have come here. He should not have thought that anyone would take him seriously. He was about to turn and walk away when the owner raised his hand. "Enough," the owner said. His voice was quiet but firm. The two workers stopped laughing immediately. "Get back to work. Both of you." They disappeared into the kitchen without another word. The owner turned back to him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, the older man let out a slow breath. "You know," he said, "my father came to this country with nothing. No money. No English. Just a dream and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. People laughed at him too, told him he would never amount to anything." He paused and looked up at the sky, as if remembering something from long ago. "He built this restaurant from the ground up, worked 18-hour days for 20 years, never complained, never gave up. And you know what he always told me?" He shook his head. "No, sir. He said that every person deserves a chance to prove themselves. Every single one. Because you never know where greatness is hiding." The owner looked at him hard, like he was trying to see past the dirty clothes and into the person underneath. "One song," the owner said finally. "Out front, not inside. Do not make me regret this." For a moment, he could not believe what he was hearing. His eyes stung, and he had to blink back tears. "Thank you," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you so much. You will not regret it. I promise." The owner nodded once, then turned to go back inside. "What is the song?" he asked. He thought about it. There was only one choice. The song he had sung at his wedding. The song his wife had picked, because it was the same aria that had been playing the night they first met. The song that meant everything. "It is an Italian aria," he said. "A love song." The owner's expression softened just slightly. "My wife loved opera," the owner said quietly. "She passed 10 years ago. I still play her favorite records sometimes when the restaurant is closed." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An understanding. A shared knowledge of loss. Then the owner nodded once more and went inside. He stood there for a moment, his heart pounding. This was really happening. After 3 years of silence, he was going to sing again. He walked slowly around to the front of the restaurant. The large windows glowed with warm light. Inside, people laughed and ate and lived their lives, unaware of what was about to happen. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw his wife's face. He saw her smile. He heard her voice. "Sing for me," she whispered. One more time, and so he would. He stood on the sidewalk in front of the restaurant, his worn shoes planted on the cold concrete. The evening air bit at his face, but he barely noticed. His mind was somewhere else, entirely. Somewhere far away and long ago. Through the large windows, he could see the dinner crowd inside. Couples sharing bottles of wine. Families passing plates of pasta back and forth. Friends laughing over dessert. They were all wrapped up in their own little worlds, their own conversations, their own lives. None of them knew what was about to happen. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Whether from the cold or from nerves, he could not tell. Maybe both. For a moment, doubt crept back in. What was he thinking? He had not sung a single note in 3 years. His voice was probably ruined. He would make a fool of himself. People would laugh. They would record him on their phones and turn him into some kind of joke on the internet. But then he reached into his pocket and felt the worn photograph of his wife. The edges were soft from being touched so many times. He did not need to look at it. He knew every detail by heart. Her smile, her eyes, the way her hair blew in the wind. He had made her a promise. And he had broken it for far too long. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The cold air filled his lungs. He let it out slowly. And then he began to sing. The first few notes came out rough. His voice cracked and wavered, rusty from years of silence. He sounded like an old car trying to start on a frozen morning. For a terrible second, he thought this was a mistake. He should stop. He should walk away before anyone noticed. But he kept going. He pushed through the rust and the fear. He thought of his wife. He thought of the night they met, sitting in that concert hall, watching a tenor pour his heart out on stage. He thought of their wedding day, standing in front of family and friends, singing this very song to her as tears rolled down her cheeks. And something shifted. His voice began to open up. The roughness smoothed out. The notes grew stronger, clearer, more sure of themselves. It was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. What started as a whisper became a sound that filled the entire street. The aria rose into the night air. It was a song about love and longing, about holding on to someone even when they are gone. The melody soared and dipped, carrying emotions that words alone could never express. He sang in Italian, a language he had learned just to impress his wife all those years ago. She had loved it. She said it made her feel like she was in a movie. A woman walking by stopped in her tracks. She had been looking at her phone, but now she lowered it and stared. Her mouth fell open slightly. Then another person stopped. And another. A taxi driver pulled over to the curb and rolled down his window. A group of college students on their way to a bar paused and fell silent. An elderly couple holding hands stood frozen on the sidewalk, their eyes glistening. Inside the restaurant, something was happening too. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks stopped and turned toward the window. A child tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed outside. One by one, the conversations died down. Forks stopped moving. Glasses were set down on tables. The owner emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the sudden silence. He walked to the front window and looked out. What he saw made him catch his breath. There, on the sidewalk, stood the homeless man he had given a chance to just minutes ago. And the sound coming from him was unlike anything the owner had ever heard. It was pure. It was powerful. It was the kind of voice that made you believe in something bigger than yourself. The owner pushed open the front door and stepped outside. He did not say a word. He just stood there and listened, his eyes wet with tears. He did not bother to hide. More people gathered. They came from across the street, from parked cars, from the shops nearby. Within minutes, a crowd of nearly 50 people had formed on the sidewalk. They stood in silence, strangers brought together by something extraordinary. He sang with his eyes closed, lost in the music and the memories. He was not on a cold street in Philadelphia anymore. He was back in that concert hall, 26 years ago, locking eyes with the woman who would become his everything. He was at the altar, watching her walk toward him in a white dress. He was in their tiny kitchen, singing silly songs while she laughed and stirred spaghetti sauce. He was in the hospital room, holding her hand as she slipped away. Tears streamed down his face, but his voice never broke. If anything, it grew stronger. The pain, and the love, and the grief, all poured out of him, transformed into something beautiful. This was not just a song. It was a prayer, a tribute, a final love letter to the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. The final note hung in the air like a held breath. It stretched out, pure and clear, before finally fading into the winter night. For a moment, there was complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the whole world had stopped to listen. Then the applause began. It started with one person clapping slowly. Then another joined in. And another. Within seconds, the entire crowd erupted into thunderous applause. People cheered. Someone shouted bravo. Others wiped tears from their eyes, not caring who saw them cry. A businessman in an expensive coat stepped forward and pressed a $20 bill into his hand. "Thank you," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not know what you have been through, but that was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." Before he could respond, another person came forward. A young woman with red eyes handed him money and squeezed his arm. "You made me think of my grandmother," she said. She used to sing that song. More people followed. One after another, they pressed bills into his trembling hands. 5s, Tens. 20s. More money than he had seen in years. But it was not the money that broke him. It was the way they looked at him. For the first time in 3 years, people were seeing him. Not looking through him. Not avoiding his eyes. Seeing him. The owner walked forward slowly. His face was wet with tears, and he made no effort to hide them. He put a strong hand on his shoulder and looked him straight in the eye. "My wife loved opera," the owner said quietly. "I told you that. She would play records every Sunday morning. After she passed, I could not listen to it anymore. It hurt too much." He paused and took a shaky breath. "But what you just did," the owner continued, "that was not just singing. That was something holy. I do not know what you have lost, but I can hear it in your voice. And I want you to know that you are not alone." He could not speak. The tears were flowing freely now, and his whole body was shaking. Not from the cold this time, but from the overwhelming flood of emotions. The owner squeezed his shoulder. "Come inside," he said. "You are not eating on the sidewalk tonight. You are eating at the best table in my restaurant. And you are eating like a king." He guided him toward the door. The crowd parted to let them through, still clapping, still wiping their eyes. As he stepped into the warm glow of the restaurant, he felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if anything would really change. But for the first time since his wife had closed her eyes, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he still had something to offer the world. His voice had come back, and with it, a tiny piece of his soul. Inside his pocket, he touched the worn photograph one more time. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "I finally kept my promise." And somewhere, he was sure, she was smiling. That night, he ate like he had not eaten in years. Because he had not. The owner sat him at a corner booth near the kitchen, away from the windows, but close to the warmth. A candle flickered on the table. The checkered tablecloth was soft under his rough hands. Everything felt like a dream. The food kept coming. First, a basket of fresh bread with olive oil and herbs. Then, a bowl of soup, so rich and warm, it made his eyes water. After that came a plate of pasta with homemade sauce, followed by chicken cooked in wine and garlic. He tried to eat slowly, to savor every bite. But his body was so hungry that his hands moved on their own. The owner sat across from him, not eating, just watching with a quiet smile. "Take your time," the owner said. "There is plenty more." Between bites, they talked. He told the owner about his life, about teaching music, about his wife, about the illness that took everything from him. The words came pouring out like water from a broken dam. He had not talked to anyone like this in years. He had forgotten what it felt like to be heard. The owner listened without interrupting. He nodded in the right places. His eyes showed understanding, not pity. When the story was done, the older man was quiet for a long moment. "I came to this country when I was 19, the owner finally said. "My father brought us here with nothing but a suitcase and a recipe for tomato sauce. We lived in a one-room apartment above a laundromat. I worked in a factory during the day and helped my father cook at night." He leaned back and looked around the restaurant, at the walls covered with family photos and the tables filled with happy customers. "But we did," he continued. "We built this place brick by brick, and when my father passed, I promised him I would keep it going. Then my wife got sick, and I almost lost everything. Not the restaurant. Myself. I almost lost myself." "Known." His voice grew thick, and he paused to collect himself. "What I am trying to say is that I understand. Grief can swallow you whole if you let it. But it can also make you stronger. It can remind you what matters. And what matters is not the things we lose. It is the love we carry with us." He reached across the table and placed his hand over his. "You have a gift," the owner said. My wife would have said that God does not give a voice like that without a reason. Do not waste it. Not again. He nodded, unable to speak. His throat was too tight with emotion. After the meal, the owner insisted he stay the night. There was a small room above the restaurant, used for storage mostly, but it had a cot and a heater. It was warm. It was safe. It was more than he had in 3 years. He slept deeper that night than he had since his wife passed. The next morning, he woke to the sound of knocking. The owner stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee and a strange look on his face. "You need to see something," the owner said. He followed him downstairs to the office behind the kitchen. There was a computer on the desk, and the owner pointed at the screen. "One of my servers recorded you last night," the owner explained. "She posted it on the internet. I do not understand these things very well, but she says it has gone viral. Whatever that means." He leaned closer and looked at the screen. There was a video playing. It showed him standing on the sidewalk, eyes closed, singing into the cold night. The quality was shaky, filmed on a phone, but the sound was clear. He watched himself hit the high notes, watched the crowd gather, watched strangers cry. Below the video were numbers he could not make sense of. Views, shares, comments, thousands of them, then hundreds of thousands. He scrolled through the comments, his hands trembling. "Who is this man? I need to know his story. I am crying at work right now. This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Someone find him. Someone help him. He deserves the world." This man sang with his whole soul. You can hear the pain and the love in every note. He kept scrolling. More comments. More kindness. People from all over the world, strangers who would never meet him, pouring out their hearts in response to his song. His eyes blurred with tears. "I do not understand," he whispered. "Why do they care?" The owner put a hand on his shoulder. "Because you made them feel something. In a world full of noise, you reminded them what real emotion sounds like. That is rare. That is precious." Over the next few hours, the phone in the restaurant started ringing. News stations wanted interviews. Radio shows wanted to talk to him. A music producer from New York left a message saying he had connections to an opera company. By afternoon, a reporter showed up at the restaurant. She was young, with bright eyes and a notebook in her hand. She asked if she could hear his story. He was hesitant at first. He did not want attention. He just wanted to eat, and maybe find a warm place to sleep. But the owner encouraged him. "Tell your story," the owner said. "Not for fame, not for money, but because someone out there needs to hear it. Someone out there is going through what you went through, and they need to know they are not alone." So he talked. He told the reporter about his wife, about losing his job and his home, about the years of silence, and the night he finally decided to sing again. He talked about the owner who gave him a chance when no one else would. The story ran that evening on the local news. By the next morning, it had been picked up by national outlets. Suddenly, the whole country knew his face. More importantly, they knew his voice. A crowdfunding page appeared online, started by a woman in California who had seen the video. Within 24 hours, it had raised over $50,000. By the end of the week, it had passed 150,000. He could not believe it. Strangers were giving money to help him. People who had never met him, who lived thousands of miles away, were opening their wallets because a 3-minute video had touched their hearts. Messages poured in from everywhere. A woman in Texas wrote that she had been planning to end her life until she saw his video. His voice reminded her that beauty still existed in the world. A man in England said he had not spoken to his father in 10 years, but after watching the video, he picked up the phone and called. A teenager in Japan wrote that she wanted to become a singer because of him. He read every message. Every single one. And with each one, something inside him shifted. For years, he had believed he had nothing left to give. He thought his voice was useless. His life was over. His purpose was gone. But now, he saw the truth. His pain had become a bridge. His song had become a lifeline. The worst thing that ever happened to him had transformed into something that could help others. That night, he sat alone in the little room above the restaurant. The city lights glowed through the small window. Somewhere out there, millions of people had heard his voice. He pulled out the photograph of his wife and looked at it for a long time. "You were right," he said softly. "You were always right. The voice was never just for me. It was meant to be shared." He pressed the photo to his heart and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. And for the first time in years, he was ready to face tomorrow. 6 months had passed since that cold winter night outside the restaurant. 6 months since he had stood on a sidewalk and sang for a meal. 6 months since the world had stopped to listen. Everything was different now. He stood backstage at a small theater in downtown Philadelphia, his hands trembling slightly. Not from cold this time. Not from hunger. But from nerves. The good kind of nerves. The kind that meant something important was about to happen. Through the curtain, he could hear the audience settling into their seats. The theater held about 300 people, and every seat was full. Some had driven hours to be here. Others had flown in from different states. They had all come for the same reason. They had come to hear him sing. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. After the video went viral and the crowdfunding money came in, everything changed fast. He used some of the money to rent a small apartment. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom place with a kitchen and a window that let in the morning sun. But it was his. For the first time in 3 years, he had a door he could lock and a bed he could call his own. He used more of the money to see a doctor. Years on the street had taken a toll on his body. He had infections that needed treating, teeth that needed fixing, a heart that needed checking. The doctor told him he was lucky to be alive. He did not feel lucky. He felt blessed. But the most important thing he did with the money was get help for his mind. He started seeing a counselor, a kind woman who listened without judgment and helped him untangle the grief that had been choking him for years. It was hard at first. Some sessions left him in tears. But slowly, week by week, he started to heal. The restaurant owner became like a brother to him. They had dinner together every Sunday night. They talked about their wives, about loss, about what it meant to keep going when everything inside you wanted to stop. The owner never asked for anything in return. He just showed up, again and again, proving that kindness still existed in the world. The young woman who had recorded his video became a friend too. She was a college student studying journalism, and she had made his story the focus of her senior project. She interviewed him several times, documenting his journey from the streets to the stage. She said she wanted the world to see that people who fall can rise again. But perhaps the most meaningful change was not about him at all. 3 months after the video went viral, he started volunteering at a homeless shelter downtown. He went there 3 days a week, not to receive help, but to give it. He taught music to anyone who wanted to learn. He brought in a used keyboard he had bought at a thrift store. He sat with people who reminded him of himself and showed them how to find their voices. There was one young man in particular who had touched his heart. He had been living on the streets for 2 years, unable to hold a job, unable to connect with anyone. When they first met, the young man would not even make eye contact. He sat in the corner of the shelter with his arms crossed, staring at the floor. But week after week, he kept showing up. He would sit near the young soldier and play the keyboard softly. He never pushed, never demanded anything. He just let the music fill the room. One day, the young man spoke for the first time. "I used to sing in church when I was a kid," he said quietly. He looked at the young man and smiled. "Then let's sing," he said. That afternoon, they sang an old hymn together. The young man's voice was rough and unsure, but it was there. It was real. And by the end of the song, there were tears on both their faces. That young soldier was in the audience tonight. Front row. He had gotten a job last month and was renting a room in a boarding house. Small steps, but steps forward. A stagehand appeared beside him, pulling him from his memories. 5 minutes, she said. He nodded and took a deep breath. He looked down at his clothes. He was wearing a simple black suit, donated by a tailor who had seen his story on the news. It was the nicest thing he had worn in years. His shoes were polished. His hair was cut short and neat. He barely recognized himself, but inside, he was still the same person. Still, the man who had lost everything. Still, the man who had been given a second chance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. It was even more worn now, the edges soft as fabric. But her smile was still there. Her eyes still looked up at him with love. "I wish you could see this," he whispered. "I wish you could be here." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. She was here. She had always been here. In his heart. In his voice. In every note he sang. The stagehand returned. "It is time," she said. He tucked the photograph back into his pocket and walked toward the stage. The curtain parted, and the lights hit his face. For a moment, he could not see anything. Just brightness. Just warmth. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw them. 300 people, looking at him with hope and expectation. In the front row, the restaurant owner sat with tears already forming in his eyes. Next to him was the young journalism student, her camera ready, and beside her was the young soldier, sitting up straight, his face full of something that looked like pride. He walked to the center of the stage. A single microphone stood waiting for him. Behind him, a small orchestra sat ready to play. This was not a street corner anymore. This was a real stage, a real audience, a real moment. But the feeling inside him was exactly the same. He closed his eyes and thought of his wife. He thought of their first meeting, their wedding, their life together. He thought of the promise he had made in that hospital room. Keep singing, no matter what. He opened his eyes and looked out at the audience. "Before I begin," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I want to tell you something. 6 months ago, I was invisible. I sat on a sidewalk and watched the world walk past me. I had lost my wife. I had lost my home. I had lost myself. I thought my life was over." He paused and took a breath. "But then someone gave me a chance. A stranger who owed me nothing looked at me and saw a human being. He let me sing for a meal. And that one act of kindness changed everything." He looked at the restaurant owner in the front row. "I am standing here tonight because of him. Because he reminded me that I still had something to offer. That my voice was not gone. That my story was not over." The audience was silent. Some were already crying. "So, if you take anything from tonight," he continued, "let it be this. Be kind. Be generous. Give people chances they have not earned. You never know whose life you might save. You never know what song is waiting to be heard." He turned to the orchestra and nodded. The music began. Soft, at first, a gentle melody that floated through the theater like a whisper. And then he sang. He sang for his wife, for the owner, for the young soldier, for every person who had ever felt invisible. He sang with everything he had, holding nothing back. The notes soared through the theater, filling every corner, touching every heart. And somewhere, he was sure, his wife was listening. She was smiling, and she was proud.